Welcome back. Get comfortable. Let everything slow. Tonight we begin a different kind of story. Not the cosmic war of gods and primarchs. Not the sprawling mythology of 8 realms. Something smaller, quieter, set in the late years of a feudal Japan that never quite existed. In mountains and forests and old temples where the air smells like pine and cedar and something older than either. Sekiro. Shadows Die Twice is a story about a shinobi and his lord, about loyalty and what it demands, about immortality, not as a gift but as a weight, and what happens to a world when too many people refuse to let go of the life they have. And it is, in its bones, a story about learning when to die. Before the story begins, long before the events of the game, before the Ashina clan, or the Interior Ministry, or the man who would be called Wolf, there was a divine being from the West. The world of Sekiro has its own geography of the sacred. Japan, as the game renders it, is a land where the divine is not metaphorical. Gods exist here in a specific and literal sense. Beings of genuine supernatural power who touch the world in ways that ordinary existence can't account for. The mountains hold things older than the settlements at their base. The water in certain places carries properties that defy what water should be. And a dragon came from somewhere beyond the known world. The divine dragon, the Sakura dragon, named for the cherry blossoms that attend its presence, is an entity of extraordinary antiquity. Its origins are in the West, in lands that the game gestures toward without fully describing. It is colossal. It is beautiful in the way that things which have existed long enough to accumulate something like serenity are beautiful. It wields a sword made of something other than steel. It commands winds and the power of the ever-blossom, the sacred tree whose flowering marks divine presence. The dragon came to Japan, to the land that the game maps across its forests and temples and ruined estates, and it brought with it a power that would define everything that followed. Immortality. Not the immortality of the Chaos God's champions, earned through corruption and devotion. Not the immortality of the Stormcast Eternals, maintained through divine machinery and sacrifice. Something older and quieter than either of those. A heritage, a lineage, passed through bloodlines, through specific ceremonies of binding, through the particular connection between a divine heir and the one who guards them. When the dragon's heritage passes to a person, that person can die and return. The specific mechanism. The dragon's power flows through the divine heir, and anyone who swears themselves to that divine heir shares in the power. They die, they return. Death becomes provisional, but there is a cost. Dragon rot. Every time someone bound to the dragon's heritage dies and returns, something happens to the people around them. Not immediately, not all at once. Gradually. A cough here, a paleness there. A weariness that deepens over days into something that has no natural explanation. Dragon rot. The disease spreads from the repeated resurrections of those touched by the heritage, as if the life that returns to the dead must be borrowed from somewhere, and the somewhere is the living people nearby. The dragon rot is real, documented in the game's item descriptions and in the fates of NPCs across its world. Merchants and monks and wanderers who encounter the protagonist and then, over the course of the game's events, develop the cough, the pallor, the increasing stillness of someone the disease is consuming. This is one of Sekiro's most deliberate design choices. making the player feel the cost of their own resurrection. Every time you die and come back, you are implicitly taking something from someone. The power to cheat death is not free. It is paid by people who did not ask to pay it, and who have no way to refuse. The dragon rot is also the first statement of the game's central theme. Immortality is not a gift, it is a transaction, and the terms are not disclosed in advance. The Divine Heir, the dragon's heritage, passes through bloodlines. Generations ago, a people came from the land of the dragon and settled in Japan, carrying the heritage with them. The Sunkin, as the lore calls them, attendants of the divine dragon, who remained after their deity arrived and stayed when it chose to remain. Over centuries, the heritage diluted through ordinary human inheritance, the specific divine power becoming rarer with each generation, the bloodlines that carried it becoming harder to trace. By the time of the game's events, there is one person who carries the heritage in its full strength. A young lord named Kuro. Kuro is the Divine Heir. Small, a quiet, thoughtful, not the image that the words Divine Heir typically conjure. He is not a warrior. He does not want to be a symbol. He is a person who happens to carry in his blood a power that everyone around him wants to use or sever or contain, and who has opinions about this that no one entirely listens to. His blood is the specific vehicle of the heritage. A few drops of it can grant a limited form of the immortality, at least temporarily, to someone who drinks it. This is what Genichiro Ashina is trying to do when the game begins. Use Kuro's blood to create an army that cannot die. The idea of an immortal army sounds straightforwardly powerful. Sekiro's entire lore is organized around showing why it is not. Why immortality, at scale and over time, produces something other than strength. Why the specific quality of being unable to die corrodes the things that make living meaningful. The dragon from the west, the divine dragon itself, is present in the game's world, not as a historical figure, but as a literal being, accessible if you know how to reach it. Fountainhead Palace, the game's most visually extraordinary location, is the dragon's domain, a place of sakura blossoms and still water and architecture that belongs to a different aesthetic tradition than the rest of the game's feudal Japan setting. The palace is also a demonstration of what immortality does over time. The nobles who inhabit it, or who inhabited it, because by the game's events, they have been transformed into something that uses the word inhabit only approximately, sought immortality through the rejuvenating waters, the sacred water that carries the dragon's power. They found it, they have it, and they have had it for long enough that they have become something pale and strange and wrong. Beings who preserved themselves past the point at which preservation was distinguishable from decay. The Fountainhead Palace is beautiful and deeply unsettling for this reason. Everything there is preserved, the blossoms, the architecture, the water's quality. But the preservation has the specific quality of a museum rather than a living place. Things maintained rather than things that grow and change. Immortality has made the palace eternal and made it, in its own way, dead. The old dragons of the tree, the twisted former devotees of the divine dragon, who serve it in the game's boss encounter, reinforce this. They are ancient. They are weak, moving slowly, and coughing the same damaging mist that dragon rot produces in its victims. They represent what the dragon itself has been made to carry, the weight of mortals using its power in ways it was never meant to be used, drawing on its divine essence to cheat their own deaths and leaving it diminished by the transaction. When you fight the divine dragon, and you must fight it for reasons the story requires, what you are doing, the lore suggests, is not simply defeating an enemy. You are encountering a being that has been made sick by the specific way its power has been used and abused across centuries. The fight with the old dragons first, clearing them before the dragon itself appears, is described by some lore interpretations as cutting away the dead wood, freeing the dragon from the accumulated weight of those who drew on it improperly. And what the dragon gives you at the end of the encounter is his tears. Not a weapon or a power or a key. Tears. The specific thing a god sheds when something it has been carrying is finally being addressed. What immortality is in Sekiro. Before we continue into the story of Wolf and Kuro and Ashina and everything that the game's events unfold, it is worth sitting with what the game has established about immortality in its first hour. Immortality here is not a state. It is a relationship. The dragon's heritage flows between the Divine Heir and the one bound to protect them. It is the specific connection of loyalty that carries the power, not the blood alone. A person cannot simply take immortality. They must be bound to someone who carries it, and that binding creates obligations in both directions. Immortality here is also not neutral. Every death that is reversed is a debt paid by someone else. The dragon rot that spreads from repeated resurrections is not a game mechanic in the dismissive sense. It is the story's most persistent moral statement. The world contains a finite amount of something that makes life possible, and using it to extend one life contracts another. There are no free deaths in Sekiro, and immortality here is, ultimately, a problem to be solved, rather than a gift to be kept. Every ending in the game involves addressing the dragon's heritage, ending it, returning it, severing the specific bond that makes it possible. The game's question is not how to maintain immortality, but how to resolve it. What does it mean to let go of the power to come back? What does it mean to choose, finally, to stay dead? These are the questions that the story is going to spend its considerable length asking, and the man who is going to answer them imperfectly, at cost, through a series of deaths that are not as final as they look, is a shinobi without a name, who was given one by a boy who treated him like a person, rather than a tool. His name, when the game begins, is Wolf. By the time of the story's end, he is Sekiro. This is where we begin. Sleep well. The story continues tonight, and in the nights to follow. The mountains of Ashina are cold, and the rain is coming. Welcome back. Let everything slow. The rain is still falling in the mountains of Ashina. It has been falling in various forms for most of the game's history. Something about this land invites water, the mist that moves through the cedar forests, the rivers that run cold from the peaks, the sacred waters in the valleys that carry properties no ordinary water should have. Tonight we meet the land and the people who live on it. What Ashina is, how it came to be, and the two people at the center of the story. The boy who carries an immortal legacy he did not choose, and the man trained since childhood to keep him safe. Ashina, a land that should not have survived. 20 years before the events of the game, the land of Ashina was occupied territory. Japan in the Sengoku period, the era of warring states that the game is set in, was a place where the map changed constantly, where smaller lords were swallowed by larger ones, where the absence of a unified central authority meant that strength was the only law that mattered consistently. Ashina was a land that had been overrun. Its people served foreign lords, lived under occupation, and had been doing so long enough that resistance seemed not merely futile, but simply the condition of existing in that place at that time. Isshin Ashina changed this. He is called the Sword Saint, Kensei, a title that speaks to something beyond simple martial excellence. There are many skilled swordsmen in Sekiro's world. There is only one Sword Saint, and the distinction is not merely honorary. An Isshin's specific gift was a quality of mastery that the game's combat system gestures toward in every encounter with him. A man so complete in his understanding of the sword that fighting him feels less like combat and more like being given a demonstration of everything the sword can be. He led a coup, not a gradual political maneuvering, not a patient accumulation of allies over decades, a decisive act of armed rebellion, executed with the specific directness of a man who had decided that the time for patience was over. He fought alongside legendary companions, Gyubu the demon, whose battlefield presence was extraordinary, Lady Butterfly, whose shinobi skills made her one of the most dangerous people alive, the Owl, a wandering shinobi of enormous capability, and the man who would become the Sculptor, and then still known as a shinobi called Orangutan. The coup succeeded. Isshin defeated General Tamura in single combat, the specific military logic of the period, where a commander's death could decide an engagement, and the occupation ended. Ashina was free. The Ashina clan, founded in the blood of that rebellion, controlled the land that had given them their name. For 20 years, the Ashina clan held what it had won. And then the Interior Ministry came. The weight of a failing clan. By the time the game begins, Isshin is old and dying. The man who had changed his country through force of will and martial genius is in his quarters, on his sickbed, still sharp in mind but limited in body. The Ashina clan's primary protection, the specific deterrence that Isshin's reputation provided, had the knowledge that attacking Ashina meant potentially facing the Sword Saint himself, is eroding with his health. The Interior Ministry represents the unifying central authority that the Sengoku period was eventually moving toward. The consolidation of Japan's warring factions under a single military power. Ashina, as an independent clan that had carved out its territory through rebellion rather than through alliance with the emerging center, is exactly the kind of remnant that a unifying authority needs to absorb or eliminate. The ministry's forces are coming. Not immediately, but coming. And everyone in Ashina who pays attention knows it. Genichiro Ashina is the one who pays closest attention. He is Isshin's adopted grandson, the son of a woman who died after Isshin's coup, and taken into the family by the old man who saw something in the boy worth preserving. He grew up in the shadow of his grandfather's legend, trained under Lady Tomo, a descendant of the Okami warrior women of the Fountainhead Palace, who taught him the specific lightning-based techniques that make his combat style so distinctive. He is genuinely capable and genuinely devoted to Ashina in the way that someone who grew up being told what Ashina had cost to create is devoted to it. He has also concluded something that no one else in Ashina is willing to say out loud, that Ashina cannot be saved by normal means. The Ashina swordsmanship is extraordinary but finite. The clan's soldiers are skilled but numbered. The Interior Ministry has numbers that dwarf anything Ashina can field, and the organizational capacity of an emerging national government. A conventional defense will fail. Genichiro knows this with the specific certainty of someone who has thought about nothing else for years. What he needs is something unconventional, something that changes the arithmetic entirely. An immortal army would change the arithmetic. The boy called Kuro. Kuro is a child of the Hirata clan, a noble family that maintained the dragon's heritage across generations, the bloodline that carries the remnant of the divine dragon's power. The Hirata clan's estate was attacked 3 years before the game begins, in a raid by bandits that the law strongly implies was arranged rather than accidental, coordinated with the Interior Ministry in a way that left the estate defenseless at a specific critical moment. The implication: someone orchestrated the Hirata estate attack. The someone, as the game eventually reveals, is the owl. Kuro's family is dead or scattered. Kuro himself survived. He ended up under the protection of Ashina, not as a prisoner exactly, but not entirely free either. The specific situation: the Ashina clan is aware that Kuro carries the dragon's heritage. Isshin, the old sword saint, objects to using Kuro in the way his grandson proposes, but cannot prevent it indefinitely. Kuro is technically a guest. The ground beneath that courtesy is fragile. What Kuro is, as a person, thoughtful, quiet, are with the specific quality of someone who has been through enough to develop either hardness or depth, and who chose depth. He reads. He thinks carefully about the implications of the power he carries. He does not want to be the source of an immortal army. He has opinions about what should happen to the dragon's heritage that nobody around him entirely listens to, because the power he represents is too valuable for anyone to let his opinions settle the question. He treats the shinobi assigned to protect him as a person. This turns out to matter. Wolf, an orphan shaped into a tool. The owl found a child on a battlefield after Isshin's coup. A nameless orphan, small enough that the outcome of the battle he had been attached to had left him simply unclaimed rather than killed. When the owl drew his blade across the child's face, attesting for fear, the child grabbed the blade, calmly, without flinching. The owl named him Wolf. This origin story tells you what you need to know about both of them. The owl is a shinobi who tests people by exposing them to pain and violence and reads their worth by how they respond. The child who would be Wolf responded by reaching for the weapon rather than away from it. The owl saw this as capability. He was right, in a limited sense. What the owl shaped Wolf into over the next 20 years was a tool of extraordinary capability. The Iron Code, the shinobi's law that Owl drilled into Wolf through his childhood, establishes the priorities of a shinobi's existence. The father's word is absolute. The master's word is close second. Protect the master at all costs. It is a code designed to create reliability, are to ensure that a shinobi does not become unpredictable by developing attachments that might conflict with instructions. Wolf was trained to be reliable in this specific sense. He became exceptional. The skills the game gives the player, the shinobi arts, the use of the prosthetic arm, the specific quality of the combat that made him the most capable shinobi in Ashina, are the result of 20 years of formation by a man who treated him as an investment. What the owl did not account for was Kuro. Kuro treated Wolf as a person, not a tool, not a bodyguard whose function could be reduced to its outputs. A person. He gave Wolf a name, Sekiro, one-armed wolf. That was not the practical designation Owl had assigned, but something more like an identity. The specific relationship between Kuro and Wolf developed over years of proximity. He created in Wolf something the Iron Code was designed to prevent. Genuine loyalty, rooted not in the law of the father, but in the specific feeling of being seen as someone rather than something. This is why the game's central choice, when it comes, is genuinely difficult. The Iron Code says one thing, what Wolf feels says another. 3 years ago, Hirata Estate. The Hirata Estate attack is accessible through a memory, one of the game's most revealing optional sequences. Bandits led by a man named Juzu, the drunkard, attacked the estate. Lady Butterfly, the shinobi who was Owl's companion since childhood, led them. The attack was too well coordinated to be coincidental. Wolf fought through it. He defeated Lady Butterfly. He protected Kuro. And then he was stabbed. From behind by an unknown assailant, left to die in the grounds of an estate that was burning around him. He should have died. He would have died, except that Kuro, finding him, understanding what was happening, shared his blood. The dragon's heritage passed through that act into Wolf, binding them together in the specific way that the heritage requires. The Divine Heir and the one sworn to protect them, the power flowing between them. Wolf became immortal that night, not because he wanted the power, but because a boy chose to save the person who had been assigned to save him. The specific reversal, the protector protected by the protected, is one of Sekiro's most quietly important moments. The person who stabbed him, as the game later reveals, was Owl, his own father. The game begins 3 years later. Wolf is in the bottom of a well in Ashina Castle, imprisoned by the clan. A note reaches him from Kuro, reminding him of his purpose, telling him where to find him. He climbs out. He rescues Kuro. They run. Genichiro is waiting. The fight that opens the game, the one the player is designed to lose, cut down by Genichiro on a moonlit field with Kuro watching, sets everything in motion. Wolf loses his arm. Kuro is taken back into the castle. Wolf is left to die, again, in the cold. He does not die. A man called the Sculptor finds him, gives him a prosthetic arm, and brings him somewhere safe. The Sculptor is a man with one arm who carves Buddha statues in a ruined temple, a detail whose significance will become clear as the story continues. Wolf has a name now, Sekiro, one-armed wolf. He has a mission, rescue Kuro. And somewhere in Ashina Castle, Genichiro is preparing to use the dragon's heritage to save a country that may already be beyond saving. Sleep well. The mountains of Ashina are full of things that do not stay dead. Tomorrow night we go deeper into what they all want. Welcome back. Let everything slow. Sekiro's world is not a world where immortality is an exception. By the time Wolf begins his journey through Ashina, it has been seeping into things for long enough that its effects are everywhere. In the monks who sought it, in the villagers who were exposed to its waters, in the old man carving Buddha statues in a ruined temple who is fighting one moment at a time not to become a monster. Tonight we follow Wolf through the world. The game shows him. Not every fight and every location, but the specific places that tell the story of what immortality does to things it touches when they hold on too long. The Sculptor, a warning in human form. Before we go further into Ashina, we should stay for a moment with the man who found Wolf on the roadside and gave him a prosthetic arm. The Sculptor is an old man with one arm, living alone in a broken-down temple on the outskirts of Ashina. He carves Buddha statues, compulsively, constantly, filling the temple grounds with figures of increasing intricacy and urgency. But there is something wrong with his Buddhas. He cannot carve serene faces. Every figure he makes has a face of wrath, the specific expression of a being in the grip of something it cannot release. His name, before he was the Sculptor, was Orangutan, a shinobi who trained in the sunken valley among the monkeys, who developed techniques based on their specific agility and unpredictability, who was extraordinarily capable and increasingly consumed by the specific pleasure that killing brought him. This is what Shura is in Sekiro's world. Not a creature or a curse in the conventional sense, but a state. What happens to a person who kills enough that killing becomes the only thing they feel? The bloodlust that begins as a tool becomes the one experience that makes existence feel real, and then it consumes everything else. The Sculptor was almost a Shura. Isshin Ashina, who had encountered Ashura before and understood what was happening, stopped him the only way he knew how. He cut off the Sculptor's left arm, not as punishment, as mercy. By taking the arm that made the Sculptor a killer, Isshin gave him a way out of the violence that was eating him alive. The Sculptor retired to his temple. He carves. He fights, one day at a time, against the flames of hatred that the law suggests are what remain of Shura's shadow in a person who stopped before it completed them. The talismans covering the temple walls, paper charms of purification and ward, are not decoration. They are a man's ongoing attempt to keep something inside from getting out. He told Wolf, at some point in their acquaintance, "You'll be the one to kill me." He was right. The Sculptor becomes the demon of hatred during the game's late events. The Shura that Isshin had prevented finally completing itself. The hatred that all those decades of carving had only contained finding its moment. He does not become a Shura in the precise sense. Something about the containment, the years of work, the specific mercy of losing the arm produced something different. The demon of hatred is not a killing machine. It is, when you fight it, something that at the moment of death thanks Sekiro for the mercy of being killed. The last thing it does is express gratitude. The Sculptor's story is the game's most sustained demonstration of what happens when someone carries violence for long enough without resolution. It is also a demonstration that the game's world takes seriously. Sometimes the most merciful thing one person can do for another is kill them. Senpu Temple. When faith goes wrong, high in the mountains above Ashina, accessible by paths that climb through cedar forests and old stone steps, Senpu Temple was once a place of genuine devotion. Buddhist monks pursuing enlightenment in the traditional sense, the release from attachment, the dissolution of the self into something larger, the specific peace that comes from letting go of what binds you to suffering. The monks of Senpu Temple found a different path, or they discovered the rejuvenating waters, the sacred water that carries traces of the dragon's heritage, and they decided that immortality was compatible with enlightenment, or perhaps that immortality was a form of enlightenment, or perhaps they simply convinced themselves of something that served what they wanted to believe. They performed experiments. The item descriptions throughout the temple document these in the specific fragmentary way that Sekiro distributes its darkest information. References to children brought to the temple for testing, to centipedes as the specific medium through which the rejuvenating water's power was concentrated and implanted, to the specific horror of what happens when you extend life through means that the life being extended did not consent to. The monks who inhabit the temple by the time Wolf arrives are not enlightened. They are immortal and they are monstrous, in the specific way that the game keeps demonstrating. Preservation without growth, existence without the natural progression that makes existence meaningful. They have held on so long that whatever they were pursuing when they began has been replaced by the simple fact of continuing. The high priest sits at the center of the temple's inner sanctum, petrified, surrounded by lesser centipedes, the medium of the immortality he sought. In a state that the game presents without comment, he sought to transcend mortal flesh. He achieved something. Whether it resembles what he was looking for is not explicitly stated. What Senpu Temple demonstrates is the specific failure mode of seeking immortality through devotion, rather than through divine connection. The dragon's heritage, when it flows through the proper bond between Divine Heir and Guardian, carries something of the dragon's nature with it. What the monks of Senpu Temple extracted and concentrated through their centipede experiments is something cruder. Immortality without the connection, the fact of persistence without the specific quality that makes the heritage meaningful. The divine child of rejuvenation, the sole survivor of the monks' experiments, a young woman who carries the heritage in its purest form because she was born from it rather than having it imposed, is the temple's only redemption. She lives in the inner sanctum, are protected by an elaborate illusion world maintained by the folding screen monkeys, waiting for someone to find a use for what she carries that does not involve the monk's approach. Wolf finds her. She becomes essential to the most hopeful ending the game offers. The rejuvenating waters and what they do. Outside Senpu Temple, the rejuvenating waters appear in other forms throughout Ashina. Mibu Village, a settlement deeper in the game's geography, is a place where the waters flow freely, and the villagers have been drinking them long enough that the specific effects are advanced. They are not well. They are immortal in the degraded sense. They continue to exist, but the existence has become something that does not fully engage with the world around it. They wander. They attack anything that moves, without the specific purposiveness of predators or the specific grief of people who know what they have lost. They are somewhere between alive and something else, in the space that the rejuvenating waters produce when consumed without the heritage's full context. The Mibu villages are the game's most accessible demonstration of mass immortality. What happens to ordinary people when the waters touch them and they drink? The monks of Senpu Temple were scholars, deliberate in their pursuit. The villagers were simply people living near sacred water, exposed to something they did not choose and could not refuse. Both outcomes are bad. The difference is in the intentions that led there, not in the results. Shura, the thing Wolf could become. Throughout the journey through Ashina, and the game is building something about Wolf specifically that the Sculptor's story has already named, the possibility of Shura. Wolf is a shinobi. His existence is organized around violence in a way that is not incidental but foundational. He was raised to be capable of violence, trained in it from childhood, selected for it by a man who found him by testing whether he flinched from a blade. He is extraordinarily good at killing. This is his function and the source of whatever purpose his life has had outside of his relationship with Kuro. The game keeps asking quietly whether the violence that makes him effective is also something that could consume him. The Sculptor is one answer to this question. A version of a shinobi who could not maintain the boundary between the violence that is a tool and the violence that becomes an identity. The demon of hatred is what it looks like when it completes itself. There is a moment in the game when Wolf is given the specific choice: follow the Iron Code, betray Kuro, serve his father Owl, and become a Shura. Not because killing Owl requires it, but because the specific context of the choice, choosing power and the code over loyalty and love, is exactly the kind of choice that removes whatever it is that keeps the violence from consuming the person wielding it. The Shura ending is the only bad ending in the game's moral structure. It is the one where Wolf stops being Wolf and becomes something that uses Wolf's skills without Wolf's heart to direct them. It is, the lore suggests, what happens when you let the Father's code replace the Lord's love as the organizing principle of your existence. By what Wolf is learning as he moves through Ashina, through the ruins of Senpu Temple and the corrupted village, and the estate memories and the places where immortality has been sought and found and paid for. Wolf is learning something that was not in the Iron Code. He is learning that holding on too long costs more than letting go. That every person and place he encounters who sought immortality, the monks, the villagers, the Sculptor in his long holding pattern, the nobles of Fountainhead Palace who are still coming, has paid for the holding in exactly what made the holding feel worthwhile. He is learning this from Kuro, who carries the heritage and wants it ended, from the Sculptor, who is fighting his own preservation with paper charms and Buddha statues, from Isshin, who is dying and has made peace with this in the specific way of someone who lived enough to understand what natural endings mean. The education is slow and accumulates in the specific way that Sekiro distributes its meaning. Not in speeches, but in moments. The dying man who is grateful. The monster who thanks you for killing it. The child who tells you that she has prepared herself for what the story requires of her. Wolf is a weapon. He has always been a weapon. The question the game is building toward is whether a weapon can choose what it is used for. Sleep well. The mountains of Ashina grow quieter as the night deepens. Tomorrow, we meet the Father who made him, and the choice that defines him. Welcome back. Let everything slow. Tonight is the story of a betrayal. Not the largest betrayal in the game. Not Genichiro's kidnapping. Not the Interior Ministry's invasion. But the most personal one. The one that requires Wolf to decide, for the first time in a life that was shaped entirely by someone else's decisions, what he actually is. The Iron Code has 3 rules. Father's word is absolute. Master's word comes second. Protect the master at all costs. What happens when the Father's word and the Master's needs are in direct conflict is the question the game was always building toward. What owl is Ukonzemon Usui? That is the owl's name, the real name, the one he conceals under the Shinobi title. The name he speaks only once in the game, and is killed before he can finish it. He was a wandering shinobi of extraordinary capability, old enough to have fought alongside Isshin Ashina in the rebellion that founded the clan, a peer of Lady Butterfly, of Gyubu the demon, of the man who would become the Sculptor. These were people who shaped the world the game inhabits. The owl was one of them. What distinguished him from the others was a quality that the law treats carefully, without fully condemning, a complete absence of loyalty to anything except his own survival and advancement. He served whoever was useful to him. He used people as instruments and discarded them when they ceased to be useful. The Iron Code he taught Wolf. Father's word is absolute. A master's word comes second. Was a code designed to produce in the student what the teacher himself did not possess. Reliable loyalty to something other than the self. He adopted Wolf because a child who grabbed a blade without flinching was worth having. Not for the child's sake, for what the child could become. He connected with Lady Butterfly. Not friendship exactly, but the specific working relationship of 2 people who understood each other's nature without either of them having to explain it. He organized the attack on Hirata Estate. Not the bandits, they were tools. Owl organized the attack. He worked with the Interior Ministry to coordinate timing, to ensure that Ashina's main forces were occupied elsewhere when the estate was raided, to give the attack the best possible chance of succeeding. What he wanted from the Hirata raid: Kuro, the dragon's heritage, immortality. What he got: Wolf stopping the attack, the interior attack collapsing, Kuro's blood flowing into a dying wolf and binding them together in the immortal oath he had been trying to capture. So he stabbed Wolf in the back and let him die, or tried to. The heritage had already passed. Then he faked his own death, let the world believe he was gone, and waited. The fake death and the long wait. 3 years pass in Sekiro's timeline between the Hirata Estate attack and the game's opening. During those 3 years, Wolf is bound to Kuro and protecting him within Ashina. The owl is alive and watching, presenting himself as dead to everyone who might look for him. He is waiting for his moment, for the circumstances to align such that he can approach Kuro directly or approach Wolf directly and offer the choice that only he can offer. The game reaches this moment after Wolf has completed most of the central quests, has acquired the materials needed for the Immortal Severance ritual, has fought through Ashina and its environs, has earned Kuro's full trust. Then the Interior Ministry launches its final assault on Ashina. The castle burns, and at the top of it, waiting with the specific patience of someone who has planned for this contingency, is the owl. He is trying to convince Kuro to accept him into the immortal oath, to bind Kuro's dragon's heritage to himself, giving Owl the immortality he has been working toward since before Wolf was born. Kuro refuses. The owl is not surprised. He has a second approach. He turns to Wolf. The choice. The Iron Code. Father's word is absolute. The owl invokes it directly, explicitly, in the full weight of what Wolf was taught. He is your father. He is telling you to abandon Kuro, to stand down, to let him take what he came for, to honor the law you were raised in. Emma and Isshin will stop you if you obey. There will be fighting, but the code says this is what you do. The game gives you two options. Obey the Iron Code, break the Iron Code, and the game is clear about what each means, not through dialogue explicitly, but through consequence and through the specific emotional weight that 20+ hours of the story have been building toward. Obeying the Iron Code means choosing the Father's authority over the Lord's life. It means treating Wolf as the tool Owl always intended him to be, reliable, efficient, loyal to the hierarchy rather than to the person. It means being what the Iron Code was designed to produce, a weapon in someone else's hands. Breaking the Iron Code means choosing Kuro, not the abstract principle of loyalty to one's master, the specific person, the boy who treated Wolf as a person rather than a tool, who gave him a name, who shared his blood in a burning courtyard 3 years ago and bound them together in something that the Iron Code did not account for and does not have language for. Obey, the surer ending. If Wolf obeys, Emma and Isshin intervene to stop him from simply letting Owl take Kuro. Wolf fights them. He kills them. The owl, having watched this, congratulates Wolf and announces their new dominion together, names his own true name, Ukonzemon Usui, in a moment of revelation that is immediately cut short by Wolf stabbing him from behind. The same move, the same betrayal. Wolf does to his father what his father did to him in Hirata Estate 3 years ago. He takes the mortal blade. He looks out over burning Ashina. And then Kuro watches him, and Wolf becomes surer. The ending text tells you simply, for years afterward, a demon was said to roam the lands of Ashina, and thousands were killed by it. This is the one bad ending. Not bad in the sense of an unhappy outcome for a good person. Bad in the sense that Wolf has become something that is no longer Wolf in any meaningful sense. The specific horror of the surer ending is not dramatic violence. It is the specific quiet of watching someone let go of the last thing that made them a person, because they chose the code over the connection that gave the code meaning. Disobey. The father is a liar. If Wolf breaks the Iron Code, if he refuses Owl, if he chooses Kuro, then he must fight his father. The great Shinobi Owl is one of the game's most formidable bosses. The law treats this with appropriate weight. The student fighting the teacher, the child choosing the Lord over the father, the weapon refusing to be wielded by the hand that shaped it. Wolfer has surpassed Owl. This is demonstrated in the fight itself. But surpassing your teacher while fighting them is a specific kind of grief, not a triumph. Owl dies, Wolf takes from his body the aromatic branch, a fragment of the ever-blossom, and the sacred tree of the Fountainhead Palace, which is needed for one of the game's more hopeful endings. What the fight with Owl confirms, the father was always the antagonist. Not a misguided one, not someone who believed he was doing right, not a man who loved his son and chose wrong. A man who found a child on a battlefield and calculated that the child was useful, who trained that child for 20 years in the specific skills that would make him most useful, who organized the events that created the immortal oath between Wolf and Kuro, then tried to kill Wolf when that oath inconvenienced him, then faked his own death and waited 3 years for another opportunity. The Iron Code was a tool. The father was the tool's original owner. The question was whether Wolf would spend his life being someone's tool or become something else. The memory of Hirata, the father in his youth. There is an optional sequence, accessible only on the path toward the most hopeful ending, in which Wolf revisits the Hirata estate memory at a different point in time, earlier than the main memory. 3 years ago, but the earlier portion of that night. The owl is here, younger, before the confrontation with Lady Butterfly, before he stabbed Wolf in the back. He gives Wolf a key. He tells him where to go. If Wolf follows the path through this memory fully, if he fights and defeats the younger owl as he was at the height of his power, rather than the aged version on the castle roof, he finds the fight more difficult, the father more formidable, the relationship more complicated. The owl's final words in this version, if Wolf approaches slowly enough to hear them. That day I pulled you from the battlefield. I had no idea what you'd become. This is the closest the game comes to suggesting that there might have been something genuine in the adoption. Whether the owl was capable of genuine attachment to the child he found and named and trained, whether the investment of 20 years produced something more than calculation, is left for the player to interpret. The lore does not tell you Owl loved Wolf. It does not tell you he didn't. It shows you a man who was entirely capable of betrayal, who did betray him, who looks at what Wolf has become and says he had no idea. Whether that is regret or simply a shinobi's acknowledgement of being outmaneuvered by his own student, the rain-soaked memory of Hirata Estate does not resolve. What breaking the code means. Sekiro's moral universe is not organized around simple good and evil. Every major figure in it has motivations that the game presents as at least comprehensible. Genichiro wants to save his country. Owl wants to survive and accumulate power. The monks wanted enlightenment and found something crueler. But the game has a clear position on the choice between the Iron Code and Kuro. Wolf is defined from the moment Kuro gave him his name by the specific relationship between them. A relationship built on the treating of the protector as a person, on the sharing of blood in a moment of crisis, on 20+ hours of a game that is not, underneath its combat mechanics, about fighting. It is about loyalty, the specific kind that is chosen rather than coded, the kind that does not require a law to maintain it, because it is not maintained by a law. It is maintained by the specific fact of caring about someone, of having been cared about by someone, of understanding that some connections are worth more than the rules built around them. Wolf breaks the Iron Code. He chooses Kuro. He is no longer entirely what the owl made him. He is something the owl did not plan for, a shinobi who chose freely what his fangs were for. This is not a small thing in Sekiro's world. It is the entire thing. Sleep well. The father is gone. The road ahead leads to the divine dragon, to the ritual that might end everything, and to 3 different answers to the question of what loyalty finally costs. Welcome back. Let everything slow. Tonight we reach the end of the road, or rather, the 3 ends of 3 roads. Sekiro offers its most loyal players the specific gift of multiple conclusions, each one a different answer to the same central question. What does it mean to resolve something that has been wrong for a very long time? But first, the Divine Dragon. And the man who loved Ashina so much, he climbed out of his own death to defend it. Fountainhead Palace. To perform the immortal severance ritual. The ceremony that Kuro wants, that would end the dragon's heritage and stop the cycle of suffering it produces. Wolf needs the tears of the divine dragon itself. This requires reaching Fountainhead Palace. We discussed the palace in our first night, the place where immortality has been maintained so long that the maintenance has become indistinguishable from stagnation. But traveling through it as part of the story adds specific weight to what we observed theoretically. The nobles who inhabit it have been there long enough to become pale and strange, their faces carrying the specific vacancy of beings who preserved themselves past the point where there was anything left to preserve. The sakura blossoms fall constantly, beautiful and unnatural, in a place where nothing is allowed to pass away. The palace is what happens when you build everything around not dying. The result is not life. It is a very elaborate and beautiful form of stasis. Everything is maintained. Nothing grows. The blossoms fall, and the water runs cold and clear, and the figures that move through it have forgotten whatever they were trying to protect when they first chose to stay. At the top of the palace, behind an altar, where water flows in a continuous sacred stream, Wolf prays his way into the divine realm, the space where the dragon itself resides, between the mortal world and wherever such beings fully inhabit. The divine dragon, a god that needs to be freed. The fight with the divine dragon is unlike any other in the game. Not in its mechanics, though those are striking, involving lightning redirected from storm clouds and the specific theatrical scale of an encounter with something genuinely divine, but in its moral character. You are not killing the divine dragon. You cannot kill a god in Sekiro's world, in any conventional sense. What you are doing is clearing away what has accumulated around it. The old dragons of the tree, those ancient twisted devotees whose continued existence has been parasitically drawing on the dragon's power, weakening it, making it sick. When you fight them first and then confront the dragon, the sakura tree at the center of the divine realm blossoms again. The dragon is renewed by the encounter rather than diminished. What you receive at the end is not a trophy or a weapon. It is tears. The dragon weeps, and the tears are what Wolf carries back, the specific gift of a divine being that has been waiting perhaps for someone to come and do what needed doing, not to take power from the dragon, to relieve it of something it was carrying. The tears are one half of the ritual Kuro has been preparing for. What they do combined with the other ingredients Wolf has gathered, is create the conditions under which the dragon's heritage can be properly ended. The bloodline that has been passing this immortality across generations finally, cleanly, resolved. Genichiro's last act, Wolf returns from the divine realm to find Ashina fully consumed by the Interior Ministry's assault. The castle burns. The soldiers Wolf has fought his way past throughout the game are dying or dead. The country that Isshin built through rebellion and held through decades of the Sword Saint's reputation is ending. Genichiro is waiting with Kuro in the Silvergrass field where the story began. The same moonlit ground where Wolf lost his arm, where the game's opening defeat placed us, and it has the specific quality that good storytelling produces. A return to the origin that shows you how much has changed by showing you the same landscape. Genichiro has a second mortal blade. He wounds Kuro. The logic of this, Genichiro knows he cannot defeat Wolf. The pattern of their encounters has established this clearly, and Genichiro is the kind of person who draws correct conclusions from evidence regardless of what he wishes were true. He cannot save Ashina through Wolf, or through Kuro's willing cooperation. The ritual Kuro is preparing will end the heritage, and with it, any possibility of the immortal army Genichiro needed. So he does the only thing left to him. He uses the mortal blade on himself, sacrifices his own life, and in the moment of his death invokes the specific power of the black mortal blade to bring someone back. Isshin Ashina returns, not the dying old man on his sickbed. The Sword Saint at his absolute peak, young and ferocious, and precisely as formidable as the legends suggest. Genichiro's love for Ashina, for his grandfather, for the country that was built at cost and is now falling, produces this final act. Give Isshin one more chance to save it. Isshin himself does not entirely agree with what Genichiro has done. He has been against Genichiro's methods throughout the game. He disagrees with using Kuro, but he is Isshin. When the fight is offered, he fights with everything he has, in his prime. The final boss of Sekiro is the Sword Saint in his youth, are fighting for the continuation of the country he built, because his grandson's love for that country was strong enough to pay with his own life to give Isshin one last chance. This is one of the most emotionally complex boss fights in From Software's history. You are not fighting a villain. You are fighting a man who built something real, restored to the moment of his greatest capability, because someone who loved what he built chose to die so that he could try again. That he fails does not make the love wrong. It makes the love tragic. Wolf defeats Isshin. Kuro is wounded and mortal, the heritage not yet resolved. The ritual must be completed. What Wolf does next determines which ending he receives. The immortal severance ending. The simplest ending. The one Kuro specifically asked for from the beginning. Wolf gives Kuro the divine dragon's tears. Kuro drinks them. The heritage begins to sever, and Kuro tells Wolf what the ritual requires. That Wolf use the mortal blade to kill him, to complete the severance, to end the bloodline, to ensure that the dragon's heritage does not simply pass to another heir, as it has passed down through the generations. Kuro asks Wolf to kill him, and Wolf, who has spent the entire game keeping Kuro alive, does. There is a quality of consent and trust in this moment that the game handles with extraordinary quietness. No dramatic speeches, no final transformation. A boy who knew what he wanted, and a shinobi who honored that even though it cost everything. Wolf survives. He walks to the dilapidated temple where the sculptor lived. He hangs up his sword, and he sits where the sculptor sat and begins to carve. Buddha statues, one after another, because this is what you do when the violence is done and you need something to do with your hands. He keeps the prosthetic arm. He leaves it where he found it. Someone will come eventually, someday, needing it. This ending is melancholy without being hopeless. The cycle is broken. Kuro got what he wanted. Wolf is still here doing something quiet, keeping the next shinobi in mind. The purification ending. This ending asks a different question. What if Wolf did not have to kill Kuro? Emma discovers, through research, through the specific patience of Isshin's physician, who has devoted her life to his care and to the welfare of those around him, a variant of the ritual, one that uses the ever-blossom flower alongside the dragon's tears, one that could purify Kuro of the heritage rather than sever it through death. Leave Kuro alive, mortal, free of the bloodline's burden. The ever-blossom flower is the sticking point. The sacred tree was cut down by the owl who stole a branch from it the night of the Hirata estate attack as a trophy of his ruthlessness. The tree died. The flower no longer exists in the present, except in memory. The father's bell charm, found on the owl's body after defeating him, allows Wolf to revisit Hirata estate at an earlier point in the memory when the owl was still there, when the ever-blossom branch was still in his possession. Wolf fights the younger owl in that memory, defeats him, takes the aromatic flower, the ever-blossom blossom, carried in memory 3 years backward, brought forward into the present through the specific logic of Sekiro's world, where the past is accessible if you know how to reach it. He brings it to Kuro alongside the dragon's tears. But Genichiro has wounded Kuro. The wound that Kuro took is mortal now that the heritage has been severed. Kuro is dying regardless. Wolf makes the last choice. He uses the mortal blade on himself, kills himself, severs his own immortal oath, removes the last link of the heritage from the world. The Everblossom's power purifies Kuro completely. Kuro lives. He kneels at Wolf's grave. Then he leaves with Emma, to travel, to see the world, to be what the heritage never fully let him be. A boy with a future that belongs to him. This ending is the most emotionally true to what the relationship between Wolf and Kuro has been building toward. Wolf finally chooses something for himself, not the Iron Code, not survival, but the specific sacrifice of choosing Kuro's life over his own. It is the complete expression of the loyalty that Kuro planted in him years ago in a burning courtyard when a boy shared his blood to save the shinobi assigned to save him. The return ending, Dragon's homecoming, the most hidden ending, the one that requires the most from both the player and from Wolf's world. Conversations and quests, and the careful attention to a path that the game only reveals to those who look. The divine child of rejuvenation has been waiting at Senpu Temple. The survivor of the monk's experiments, the one who carries the heritage in its purest form. The young woman who prepared herself for a purpose she had not yet been told. She is essential to this ending in a way no other character is. Her role to serve as a vessel. When Kuro, who has been wounded, who is dying, is placed in the divine child's care, she can receive him, absorb the heritage with him inside it, carry both of them, and begin a journey. The return ending's logic: the dragon's heritage came from the west, from wherever the divine dragon originally traveled before arriving in Japan. If it can be returned to its origin, if the heritage can complete a homecoming rather than simply being severed, then it resolves not with a death, but with a departure. Something going back to where it came from, the cycle ending not through destruction, but through completion. Wolf and the divine child leave Japan together, the long journey west, to return what came from there, to end the heritage, not by cutting it, but by letting it go home. The final lines of the return ending are the most hopeful words the game speaks. They are about to embark on a journey to sever their ties to destiny. Not to deny destiny, to sever it, to make the choice that ends the predetermined pattern and opens something new. The frozen tears, what the divine child gives Wolf to offer Kuro, are the tears of a different kind of conclusion. Not the dragon's grief over what has been done to it, something that was frozen and is being released. This ending is considered the most complete, the most hopeful, the one that honors everyone who has been part of the story. Kuro, Wolf, the divine child, and the dragon itself, finally going home. What all three share: three endings, three different answers to the question of how you resolve a wrong that has been running for generations. Severance: you end it by cutting cleanly, at cost, with respect for the person who wanted it ended. Purification: you end it by sacrificing yourself so that the one you protected does not have to pay the cost. Return: you end it by bringing it back to where it belongs, by completing the journey rather than stopping it. What all three share: the heritage is resolved, the cycle ends, the dragon rot stops spreading. The world that had been quietly draining life from those near Wolf to pay for his repeated deaths is repaired, gradually, as the power that demanded those deaths is removed. What all three share: Wolf chose, not the Iron Code, not the Father's authority, not survival or power, or any of the things that every other person in Ashina sought from the heritage. Wolf chose the shape of the ending based on what Kuro needed, what Emma discovered, what the divine child offered. This is what the Iron Code could never have produced. A shinobi who chooses with full awareness of what he is choosing and why. Not because the code commands it, because the person he became, the person Kuro's trust made possible, makes this specific choice. Sleep well. One more night remains, the philosophy beneath the story, and what Sekiro is really saying about death. Welcome back. Let everything slow. Tonight we stay with two figures who have been present throughout the entire story, waiting in the background of every scene, shaping the events that Wolf navigates, standing at the center of what Ashina is, and what it means for Ashina to end. Genichiro Ashina and Isshin Ashina, grandson and grandfather. The man who built something magnificent and understood its limits. The man who loved what was built so completely that he could not acknowledge those limits until everything was gone. Genichiro, born from rebellion, shaped by loss. Genichiro's origin is quiet and easy to miss. He was not born into the Ashina family. He was born to a peasant woman, someone who fought or lived through Isshin's rebellion against the occupation, Who was part of the world that rebellion created rather than the ruling family that led it? His mother died after the coup. The child was left alone. Isshin took him in, named him Genichiro, made him his grandson, his heir, his successor in the specific way that men without natural children sometimes choose their successors, by finding someone who reminds them of what they were or what they wanted to be, and investing in them the accumulated weight of a life's work. Genichiro grew up carrying this investment, the grandchild of the Sword Saint, the future of the clan, the person who would inherit what Isshin built, the freedom of a land that had been occupied, the specific dignity of people who refused to serve foreign lords, the country that had paid for its existence in blood. He trained harder than any measure of his current position required, harder than an heir of the ruling family needed to train, with the specific intensity of someone who feels they have something to prove. Perhaps to the grandfather whose legend casts a shadow over any achievement, perhaps to himself, perhaps to the memory of the mother who died before she could see what he became. He found Lady Tomo, the teacher who danced. Tomo is never seen in the game. She exists only in dialogue, in item descriptions, in the techniques she taught, and the memories she left. She is one of Sekiro's most powerful absent presences, a character who shapes everything around her without ever appearing. She was descended from the Okami warrior women, the people of Fountainhead Palace, whose connection to the divine dragon and its waters gave them specific abilities that ordinary samurai did not possess. She fought with a style that Isshin, who saw it and was nearly killed by it, describes as dancing, a technique called the way of Tomoe, fluid, unpredictable, incorporating the specific lightning-born power of her heritage in movements that looked like movement and fought like storms. Isshin admits, in a moment of unusual candor prompted by Sak, that Tomo brought him the closest to death he had ever experienced, that he was completely taken by her. Whether this means he fell in love with her, or simply that her combat ability was unlike anything else he had encountered, is left, characteristically, for the player to interpret. What is known? She was in Ashina at some point before the game's events, in service to or company with the previous Divine Heir, Lord Takeru, the predecessor to Kuro. She watched Takeru play his flute. She danced. Genichiro, young and training, watched them both, and she taught him. Everything she knew, the way of the sword, the technique of the lightning, the specific movement style that made her fight look like water rather than combat. She invested in him what her tradition had accumulated over generations, and Genichiro absorbed it with the specific hunger of a student who intends to be worthy of the teaching. He wore the marks of that training on his body. When Genichiro strips off his armor in the fight at the top of Ashina Castle, removing the layer that identifies him as an Ashina commander, revealing the body underneath, the burned, blackened marks across his arms and shoulders are where the lightning runs through him, the physical record of years of learning to channel something that destroys uncontrolled. Tomo's techniques are described as heretical in Ashina's tradition, meaning they come from outside, from the Fountainhead Palace and its connection to the divine, from a lineage that the Ashina swordsmanship does not claim. Genichiro will use heretical techniques, he says before his final fight in the castle, if they are what's needed to save Ashina. The word heretical does not trouble him anymore. He is past the point of caring about tradition. He needs to win. The weight of knowing. It cannot be saved. The defining characteristic of Genichiro as a character, what makes him tragic rather than simply antagonistic, is that he knows. He knows Ashina cannot be defended by normal means. He knows the interior ministry will come, and that the forces he can field will not be sufficient. He knows that the specific greatness of what Isshin built, the stubborn independence of a mountain country that refused to serve foreign lords, is not transferable to military capability that can hold off a unifying national government. He has the tactical intelligence to understand this with complete clarity. He has been living with this knowledge for years. It is not new information that arrives during the game and sends him spiraling. It is the permanent condition of his tenure as the effective leader of Ashina, the thing he wakes with every morning and carries through every decision. What he wants, for the knowledge to be wrong, for there to be something he has not thought of, and for the dragon's heritage to be what he needs it to be. An immortal army that changes the arithmetic, that makes the conventional military comparison irrelevant, that lets Ashina survive through means that conventional means cannot provide. This is not villainy. It is the specific desperation of someone who has looked at the future with clear eyes and cannot accept that what they see is inevitable. He kidnaps Kuro. He pursues the heritage through every heretical channel available. Senpu Temple, the rejuvenating waters, the black mortal blade. He drinks from the waters himself, gaining a degraded immortality that lets him survive what should have killed him. The marks of failed ambition showing in his eyes as red, the specific corruption of taking immortality through the sediment rather than through the heritage's proper channel. And none of it works. Isshin's wisdom and its limits. Isshin disagrees with Genichiro's methods. This is not simply a narrative convenient way to distinguish the old man from the antagonist. It represents a genuine philosophical position that the game treats with respect. Isshin built Ashina through combat and then maintained it by becoming someone that no one wanted to fight. His authority rested on the specific deterrence of the Sword Saint's reputation. The calculation that attacking Ashina meant potentially facing Isshin himself, and the calculation of whether that was worth it, always came up unfavorable. This is not a strategy for a country's long-term survival. It is a strategy that works exactly as long as the deterrent remains credible. He knows this. He has known it for years. He is old and dying, and the deterrence is ending with him, and he has not found a solution. But he refuses Genichiro's solution specifically because he understands what the dragon's heritage does. He has seen it in Lord Takeru, who preceded Kuro as the Divine Heir, who came before the game's present with his own version of the same desire to be free of the heritage. He knows what the immortality costs. He knows what happens to those who seek it through corrupt means. He tasks Emma, his private physician, the woman who has spent her life in his service and who carries the weight of his trust in every decision she makes, with helping Wolf. Not because he believes Wolf can save Ashina, because he believes Wolf can save Kuro. These are different things, and Isshin is old enough to know which one matters. So this is the wisdom that age and proximity to death produces. The ability to distinguish between what can be saved and what cannot, and to spend the remaining time on the former. He is still wrong to do nothing about the former. He never attempts to stop Genichiro directly, never uses whatever authority he still has to prevent the kidnapping, never intervenes in the ways that his standing might have allowed. Whether this is incapacity or a deeper pragmatism, the recognition that stopping Genichiro would cost more than it preserved. The law does not fully explain. The silence of a dying king watching his heir make errors he cannot stop is one of Sekiro's most quietly devastating things, the last conversation they had. The law pieces together a picture of Isshin and Genichiro's relationship through dialogue fragments and item descriptions and the specific geometry of how they speak about each other. Genichiro watched the ever blossom with Emma and Lord Takeru when they were young. He trained under Tomoe. He grew up around the divine heritage, not as a possessor of it, but as someone adjacent to it, knowing what it was and what it meant, and watching others carry its burden. He was there when Takeru tried to end his own heritage. He knew what the ritual required. He saw Emma learn what she learned from watching Tomo work toward Takeru's purification. And then he made the choices he made. The kidnapping, the rejuvenating waters, the alliances with Senpu Temple and its monks. And what Isshin said to him about these choices is not recorded. Whether he argued, whether he simply withdrew his sanction, whether the conversations were heated or resigned, the game shows you only Isshin's explicit disagreement and Genichiro's continued pursuit. The gap between them is not bridged before Isshin dies. The thing Genichiro does in the end, sacrificing himself to bring Isshin back, is the most complete expression of what he actually was. Beneath all the kidnappings and the heretical pursuits and the red-eyed corrupted immortality, he loved his grandfather. He wanted Ashina to survive so that Isshin's work would not have been wasted. When everything else failed, what he had left was this. The grandfather was not powerless. Let him try. It does not save Ashina. Isshin dies fighting Wolf, and Ashina falls, and the Interior Ministry takes what it came for. But Genichiro's final act was not a strategic calculation. It was an expression of love, in the only language available to a shinobi, who was trained to have no language for love except combat. What Ashina was. When the game ends, in any of the good endings, Ashina has fallen. The castle burns. The soldiers are dead or scattered. The country that Isshin built through rebellion and maintained through reputation is absorbed into the Interior Ministry's expanding domain. This is not presented as unambiguously a tragedy. The Ashina clan's independence was real and costly, and came from something genuine. The specific dignity of a people who refused occupation. But the world the game shows us was also shaped by that independence in ways that caused suffering. The experiments at Senpu Temple, the pursuit of the heritage by everyone who knew about it, the specific corruption that comes from a small country with access to divine power and no larger framework to prevent its misuse. Ashina was a place that produced Isshin Ashina. one of the most extraordinary figures in the game's world, a man whose specific combination of martial genius and wisdom made him genuinely great in the way that real greatness functions, capable of building something that outlasted him even as it failed to fully embody his values. Ashina also produced what it produced: the dragon rot, the heretical experiments, Genichiro's desperate methods, the specific tragedy of a small country with access to something divine that it could not manage wisely, because no small country can manage something divine wisely, because the temptation is too large and the governance too limited. The rain falls on Ashina's ruins. The sakura blossoms scatter across the burning castle. Somewhere in the silver grass field where everything began, the grass is still. Sleep well. One final part remains. What Sekiro is saying beneath all of it, about death and loyalty, and the specific cost of staying human in a world that offers so many ways not to be. Welcome back. Let everything slow. Sekiro's present is built entirely on what came before it. Every character Wolf encounters in his journey through Ashina exists in relationship to a generation of events that preceded the game. A previous Divine Heir, a previous Protector, a previous attempt at severance that failed, and the specific inheritance of grief and knowledge that failure left behind. Tonight we go into the generation before Wolf, into Lord Takeru and Lady Tomo, and the attempt that could not quite succeed, into Emma, who carries that history and uses it, into Lady Butterfly, who exists at the intersection of that history and refuses to let go of her part in it. Lord Takeru, the boy who longed to go home. Before Kuro, there was Takeru. He is never seen in the game. Like Tomo, he exists only in what others remember and in the items that document his time in Ashina. He was the previous Divine Heir, the one who carried the dragon's heritage in the generation before Kuro, the one around whom the previous chapter of this long story organized itself. What the lore tells us, Takeru came from the divine realm, not like Kuro, born into the mortal world with the heritage passing through his bloodline, but someone who originated in the space where the divine dragon fully inhabits and was, for reasons the game does not fully specify, unable to return. He brought a branch with him as a relic of that origin, grafted it to a sakura tree in Ashina, and the tree became the ever-blossom, the sacred flowering tree whose branch is needed for the purification ritual. The ever-blossom bloomed because Takeru missed home, and a piece of the divine realm, transplanted into mortal soil, flowering with a homesickness that had nowhere else to go. He spent his time in Ashina reading, playing a flute, looking out toward the fountainhead spiral, the great coiling cloud formation visible in the distance from the castle, which is associated with the divine realm and which Genichiro would later study when practicing the lightning of Tomoe. There is something unbearably melancholy about this image. A being from the divine world, stranded in the mortal one, spending his time playing music and watching the horizon for the place he could not return to. He contracted dragon rot, not, as might seem expected, because someone bound to him was dying repeatedly. The mechanism is not fully explained, but Takeru himself was ill, and the illness spread to those around him in the way dragon rot spreads. Emma confirms that the first dragon rot epidemic, which predates Wolf's, happened in Takeru's time. What he wanted to end the dragon's heritage. The same desire Kuro has. The specific quality of the heritage's divine heirs, it seems, is that they want it gone, that carrying something divine within mortal flesh is experienced not as power, but as weight, as wrongness, as a belonging that cannot be resolved. Lady Tomo and the attempt that failed. Tomo served Takeru as Wolf serves Kuro. The same structure of bond, guardian and heir, the heritage flowing between them, the specific connection of sworn loyalty, but with the specific texture of people who had been together longer and whose story had accumulated more weight. She danced when Takeru played his flute. Genichiro watched them both, young and in training, absorbing what she would later teach him. Isshin watched her fight and was nearly killed, and was completely taken by what he saw. She was trying to find a way to free Takeru from the heritage without killing him. The purification ritual, in its earlier form, applied to the previous generation. She had the dragon's tears. She had the Everblossom. What she lacked was the mortal blade, the weapon that can kill immortals, hidden by the Senpu monks, inaccessible to her despite her knowledge of its existence and location. Without the mortal blade, she could not complete the ritual. The purification required that the last link of the heritage be severed through sacrifice, that the one bound to the heir used the mortal blade to sever the oath, dying in the process, releasing the heir into full mortality. She did not have the blade. She died trying to find a way that did not require it, or she failed in another way. The specific details of Tomo's death are another of Sekiro's maintained ambiguities, like the lost Primarchs of the Horus Heresy, or the names of the two Primarchs whose records were expunged. What happened between Tomo and Isshin? The fight that came closest to killing him, the fight that the lore suggests ended in Tomo's death, is not fully documented. What remains of her, the techniques she passed to Genichiro, the diary that Emma finds and reads and uses to unlock the purification ending in Wolf's time, the graves at the old grave where she and Takeru are buried together, the Everblossom whose branch she needed and could not reach, and Kuro, the lore suggests, through theory more than confirmed text, but theory that the available evidence consistently supports, that the black mortal blade's power to bring the dead back to life was used to create Kuro from Takeru's remaining heritage, that Kuro is in some sense Takeru's continuation, not his reincarnation exactly, but the next vessel of a heritage that Tomo's attempt could not end, born from the sacrifice of the previous bearer. Kuro has no parents. He has no origin that anyone in the game fully explains. The dragon's heritage persisted past Takeru. Kuro is where it ended up. Emma, the inheritor of everything. Emma is Isshin's physician and the daughter, by adoption, or of Dogen, the brilliant doctor and inventor who created the Shinobi prosthetic and who raised Emma after the Sculptor found her abandoned on a battlefield as a child. She is the thread that connects everyone. The Sculptor saved her. Dogen raised her. Isshin trusted her completely. She knew Genichiro when he was young, watched him practice by the fountainhead spiral, knew Tomo's history through proximity to the court that Tomo served. She has read Tomo's diary, the document that unlocks the purification possibility, the record of what Tomo was trying to do and what she could not quite accomplish. Emma is what competent grief looks like. She has watched Isshin age toward death. She has watched Genichiro make choices she disagrees with and could not stop. How she has carried the knowledge of what happened to Takeru and Tomoe and turned it into research, into the possibility of doing for Kuro what Tomo could not do for Takeru. When Wolf agrees to help her find a way to save Kuro, rather than simply sever the heritage through Kuro's death, Emma is the one who leads that research. The purification ending exists because of her. Her hope, the specific determination that there must be a way to resolve this without Kuro dying, drives the discovery of the aromatic flower and the ritual that Wolf performs. She also carries a sword, not obviously, not as a primary identity. She is a physician, she says, with a passing interest in blades. But Isshin trained her. And in the Shura ending, when Wolf has chosen Owl over Kuro, Emma steps forward with Isshin to stop him. As she is not fighting as a physician, she is fighting as someone who has decided that this specific outcome is not acceptable. Her line in that confrontation, "I have witnessed Shura once before. The very same stirs inside you. As such, you must be destroyed." She has seen the sculptor's near transformation. She knows what she is looking at when she sees Wolf moving toward Shura. And she acts. She dies in the Shura ending. She survives in the others, living at the end of the purification ending to walk with Kuro to Wolf's grave, to ensure that the boy whose protection was her final service to Isshin actually gets to leave and live. Lady Butterfly, the woman who would not let go. Lady Butterfly exists at the intersection of everything. An assassin of extraordinary capability, illusory by nature, and capable of manifesting weapons and clones from pure light, with a style so distinctive that it cannot have come from conventional training. She was Owl's companion from childhood, his partner in the specific working relationship of two shinobi who understood each other's nature. She was at Hirata Estate the night of the attack. She led it in some capacity, commanding the bandits, serving as the most dangerous component of an assault that was too well coordinated to be accidental. The theory that the law most strongly supports without fully confirming Lady Butterfly is Tomo, or is connected to Tomo's lineage so directly as to be essentially continuous with her. The name, Lady Butterfly, fits the animal naming convention of Sekiro's shinobi, all of whom carry creature names. Her connection to the Okami, to the divine realm, to fighting styles that came from somewhere beyond Ashina. These match what Tomo was. Her specific interest in Kuro, in the Hirata estate, in the object called the Sakura droplet, which is associated with the previous Divine Heir's heritage. These suggest a history longer than anything that can be explained by simple assassination work. What is confirmed? She appears in the Hirata estate memory. She fights Wolf there. She is part of the attack that killed Wolf, that led to Kuro binding Wolf to the heritage through his blood. Whether her presence was designed to achieve this, whether Lady Butterfly arranged for Wolf to be bound to Kuro, whether the entire Hirata estate attack was oriented toward producing the specific situation of Wolf as the bound guardian, is one of the game's maintained ambiguities. If Tomo spent her last efforts trying to find someone who could do what she could not do, succeed in severing the heritage for their heir, and if the Sakura droplet she carried is the specific vestige of Takeru's heritage persisting past his death, then Lady Butterfly's presence at Hirata and the attack she led can be read as a final act of devotion to a task that outlasted its original context, ensuring the conditions existed for someone else to complete what she could not. Or she was simply an assassin working for Owl, and the Hirata attack was exactly what it appeared to be. Sekiro does not resolve this. Some of its most important questions are left open, the way that the most important things in any story sometimes are, because real history does not close neatly, and because the specific texture of ambiguity is sometimes truer to how things actually work than a clean answer would be. The thread through all of them. What connects Emma and Lady Butterfly and Lord Takeru and Lady Tomo? The generation before and the figure who bridges the generations is the specific quality of devotion to a purpose that outlasts the specific circumstances that created it. Tomo served Takeru. She could not save him. What she could do was document her attempts in a diary and ensure that the knowledge survived. Emma read that diary. The purification ending exists. Lady Butterfly, if the theory is right, served a purpose that outlasted Takeru's death. The sakura droplet she carries is his heritage persisting. Her presence at Hirata created the conditions for Wolf. Emma serves Isshin and then, after Isshin is gone, serves the purpose that Isshin trusted her to serve. Kuro's safety. She carries the history of every generation before this one and uses it to give this generation a better chance. This is what continuity looks like in Sekiro's world. Not the immortal continuation of the same person through rejuvenating waters or dragon rot spreading heritage. The mortal continuation of a purpose, handed from one person to the next through knowledge and care and the specific willingness to carry something forward even when the original carrier is gone. The dragon's heritage is the wrong kind of immortality. This is the right kind. Sleep well. One final part remains. What Sekiro is really about and why it stays with you. Welcome back. This is the final part. Let everything slow. We are nearly at the end of a story told slowly across 8 nights in the cold mountains of a Japan that never existed. The game that teaches you to die. Sekiro. Shadows die. Twice begins with death. Every player who picks it up will die, many times in many ways, by enemies whose specific capabilities teach through consequence rather than instruction. You fight the way you played other games. You get killed. You fight the way Sekiro requires. You get killed less. The game is a continuous lesson in how to stop doing what you were doing and start doing what the moment requires. This is not unique to Sekiro among From Software's games. Dark Souls does it. Elden Ring does it. But Sekiro makes it the explicit subject of its lore in a way the others do not. The game you are playing, the mechanical reality of dying and returning, is the story you are living. Wolf dies, Wolf returns, the cost accumulates, others suffer. What the game is asking every time you respawn, was that death necessary? What did it cost? And at what point does the power to return become something you should choose not to use? What immortality does to people? The game shows you, systematically, what immortality does to every person or institution that acquires it. The monks of Senpu Temple sought enlightenment through immortality. What they found was corruption and stagnation, preserved existence that had hollowed out the thing that made their existence worth preserving. The high priest sits petrified, surrounded by the centipedes through which he sought his immortality, in a state that is technically alive and practically a kind of death more complete than ordinary dying. The nobles of Fountainhead Palace are beautiful and empty, their long existence having replaced whatever they valued about living with the simple fact of continuing. They maintain everything except the reason the maintenance matters. Genichiro drank from the rejuvenating waters and gained something that let him survive injuries. He also gained red eyes, blackened arms, and an immortality that served his desperation without addressing what drove it. The heritage was never going to save Ashina. The immortal army was never going to make the Interior Ministry's approach meaningless. Genichiro's logic was correct. He was right that Ashina could not be saved by normal means. But the abnormal means he pursued were the wrong abnormal means. Even Wolf's own immortality, given to him not by choice but by a boy's desperate act of love in a burning courtyard, costs the people around him. Every death he suffers, every return from that death, drains something from the living world. The dragon rot spreads. The faces of the NPCs grow pale. The merchant who was selling goods now sits coughing quietly. The game is not saying immortality is evil. It is saying immortality is a transaction with unclear terms, and that the terms, when they become clear, are usually something that the person who entered the transaction would not have chosen if they had understood them in advance. The Sculptor as warning and promise. The Sculptor exists in the game specifically to show Wolf what he could become, not through dramatic confrontation, through proximity, through the specific texture of daily life in a ruined temple with a one-armed old man who carves Buddha statues compulsively and cannot make them look peaceful. What the Sculptor represents, a shinobi who carried violence for long enough that the violence became his primary relationship with existence, not because he was corrupt or evil, but because the specific nature of the work, killing repeatedly, expertly, with the specific precision that shinobi training produces, eventually became the lens through which everything else was filtered. He was stopped. The arm was cut off. The outlet was removed. He redirected what remained into carving, the specific discipline of creation rather than destruction, the patient work of hands that learned to make something rather than end something. It is not a cure. It is a management. The demon of hatred is still inside him. The hatred that was always there, still finding its way through the paper charms and the Buddha statues. He becomes the demon eventually. He thanks Wolf for killing him when Wolf does. What this represents for Wolf, a possible future, one of several possible futures. The question the game is building from the moment Wolf meets the Sculptor is whether he will end up in the same place, whether the violence that makes him what he is will eventually consume what makes him a person, or whether there is a different way through. The answer the game provides. It depends on who he is loyal to. The Iron Code produces tools. The Oath to Kuro produces a person. Loyalty as the only reliable compass. Sekiro does not have a conventional moral system. There is no karma, no alignment, no reputation that tracks your choices in numerical form. The game's ethics are expressed through consequences and character, through what happens to Wolf and those around him based on the specific quality of his commitments. The Iron Code is a system of loyalty to hierarchy, father above master, master above everything else. The Father's word is absolute. This produces reliable behavior. It produces a weapon that can be counted on, that operates predictably, that serves whatever purpose the person at the top of the hierarchy decides. What it does not produce is a person. A weapon does not choose. A weapon does not grieve. A weapon does not tell the Father that his word is wrong and fight him in the ruined temple where a previous generation failed at the same problem. What Kuro's oath produces is different. Not loyalty to a hierarchy, but loyalty to a person, to the specific individual Kuro, who treated Wolf as someone rather than something, who shared his blood in a crisis without being asked, who gave Wolf a name. The loyalty that the Iron Code was designed to prevent is exactly the loyalty that makes Wolf capable of doing what the Iron Code demands a shinobi do. He protects his master, but he protects his master because he chooses to, not because the code compels him. And because he chooses it, he can also choose the shape of how it ends, can sacrifice himself in the purification ending, can accompany the divine child in the return ending, can honor Kuro's request, even when honoring it means doing the hardest thing he has ever done. The Iron Code would have had him obey Owl and lose Kuro. The oath to Kuro produces every good ending the game offers. Death as the subject, Sekiro is a game whose title, Shadows Die Twice, is a reference to its own central mechanic. Wolf can die and return. The shadows die twice before they are gone for good. But what the title is really about beneath the mechanic is the specific quality of willingness, not simply the ability to die and return, but the willingness to die for something, the readiness to accept when the moment comes that the dying is the right thing and that returning is not always the answer. Every good ending requires Wolf to engage with this willingness in a different form. The immortal severance requires him to kill Kuro, to be the instrument of his Lord's chosen death, to honor that choice at the cost of his own role as protector. The purification ending requires him to die himself, to choose finality over continuation, to accept the specific death that allows Kuro to live. The return ending requires him to leave, to abandon the familiar place where he has been for the entire game and walk towards something unknown, accompanying the divine child on a journey that has no guaranteed outcome. All three are forms of letting go, not of caring about Kuro, not of the bond that defines Wolf's existence, but of the specific arrangements that have structured his life. The protection, the role, the place, the identity that was given to him by a father who found him useful and a lord who found him worth caring for. He lets go of the tool. What remains is the person. What Sekiro keeps telling you. There is a line in the game that is easy to miss, and the sculptor tells Wolf, in a quiet moment between the violence, a true wolf would choose for himself how to use his fangs. This is the game's thesis in one sentence. Not loyalty above self-preservation, not self-preservation above loyalty. Not the Iron Code or the Master's word or the Father's authority. A person who chooses, who uses what they are, the violence, the skills, the specific capability that 20 years of training produced, in service of something they have actually decided to serve. Wolf was named by a father who wanted a weapon. He was given a different name by a lord who wanted a shinobi. But what he becomes across the course of the story is neither, or rather, he becomes both, in the specific combination that neither the Father's code nor the Master's wish fully anticipated, or he is a wolf who chooses for himself how to use his fangs. Shadows and light. Sekiro's visual world is organized around a specific tension. The game is beautiful. The cedar forests, the mountain light, the sakura blossoms that fall throughout every area associated with the divine. And it is also dark, full of the specific shadows that shinobi inhabit by profession and by nature. Wolf moves through both, the light places and the dark ones, the sacred mountain at Senpu and the corrupted waters in Mibu village, the extraordinary beauty of Fountainhead Palace and the wrongness underneath it, Ashina Castle burning, while the same moonlit field where the story began fills with silver grass. The world is worth protecting. That is the consistent aesthetic argument Sekiro makes. That the land Isshin fought for and Genichiro loves and Wolf traverses is genuinely beautiful. That the specific quality of this Japan that never was has a warmth that makes its ending feel like a loss worth grieving. And it is also a world where every beautiful thing has been corrupted or diminished by the wrong relationship to death, where holding on too long turns sacred into strange, where the refusal to let go makes even the most beautiful places into museums rather than living spaces. The right relationship to death in Sekiro is the relationship that allows everything else to be real. The acknowledgement that things end, that endings are not failures, that the specific texture of being alive includes the fact of mortality, and that removing mortality removes not just the bad thing, the dying, but the quality that makes the living feel like anything at all. One final image. At the end of the purification ending, Kuro kneels at Wolf's grave. He is a boy who was carrying an immortal legacy he did not choose, who spent the entire game trying to free himself from it, who watched his protector die to give him that freedom. He is mortal now. He is going to age and someday die in the ordinary way. Emma is with him. They leave together with the specific quality of people who have somewhere to go, not fleeing, not escaping, but departing with intention, toward a future that is theirs, rather than one assigned by ancient power. The shinobi prosthetic sits in the temple where the sculptor carved his Buddhas, waiting, not as a relic or a trophy, but as a tool left for the next person who will need it. The next shinobi who comes seeking strength, who will find the prosthetic arm and the empty space where someone sat before them. This is the specific form of continuity that Sekiro endorses, not the immortal continuation of the same person through preserved existence. The continuity of tools and knowledge and purpose, passed from hand to hand across time, each person who carries them mortal and eventually gone and replaced by the next. Wolf lived. Wolf died for something. The prosthetic waits for someone who will need it. Somewhere in the mountains of Ashina, the land that fell and is being reorganized by the ministry into something that remembers Isshin's rebellion only as a fact, not as a living thing. The rain is still falling. It has always been falling here. Something about this land invites water. The cedar forests are quiet. The sakura blossoms scatter without an audience. The divine dragon's realm is still. The old sickness cleared from around it. The tree that was dead now flowering again in a place that only the worthy can reach. This has been the entire Sekiro. Shadows die. twice timeline, from the divine dragon's arrival from the west, to the generation of Takeru and Tomoe, to the raising of a nameless child by a man who named him Wolf, to the events of Ashina's final days, to the 3 different answers to the question of how you end something that was wrong for a long time, told slowly, over 8 nights, for the cold quiet between sleep and waking. The shadows die twice, and the 3rd time they stay gone. Good night.